Here from Scotland,
No, it's origins elsewhere.
Yeah.
Everyone's based in Scotland, but origins are.
Well, I think when we looked at I think last time, did we look at the sort of map of Scotland, a less favoured area? And
Yes.
basically, in terms of sort of soil and climate, we're about 900 feet here at the moment in the steading, so we're about the same height as the top of Arthur's Seat. Right? So if you think about that, and then from here we go up the hill 300 feet, quite steeply, and we're north facing. So in terms of climatic terms, this is upland country, right? So that sort of thin strip of Scotland, which is sort of fertile and near the sea, we're not in. And this land here has got a very, very interesting history, which I maybe touched on a bit last time about the improvements. So this valley here is relatively poor soil. When you're down nearer the river, it gets better, as you'd expect. So you've got grade 4 land down by the river, and then it's grade 5, most of this farm is grade 5. And what that basically means is it's good for sheep, and it's good for the occasional cereal crop. Our neighbour down there has got the one farm in the valley for the next few miles. It's got a lot of ploughable land, and on the old maps that's called plough land because it was the land that got ploughed. Yeah. But having said that, when you look back, we've just recently completed a history project looking at mapping all the farms in the valley and looking at what they grow now and telling the story of all those farms back to the Second World War, or as far as back as people can remember. And it's interesting, if you go back to the last big census was done just in the 30s, there was a mosaic landscape along this valley of small fields with cereals being grown as part of the rotation, and about a dozen small mills that people use, mostly running off the ditch, the burn that runs through the valley. So there was a much more interesting landscape sort of 60 years ago, and probably up even into the 60s, the landscape has been much more diverse. So on this farm, not the person who had it before us, who moved in 1980, but the person who had it before him, who moved in 1960, he had dairy here. So he had a small bed of, I think it was dairy shorthorns. No, it was Ayrshires, because there's an old guy in one of the villages who remembers milking them. So, and all the farms in the valley would have had a small herd of Ayrshires, and they would have got picked up. The churns would have got picked up and taken to creamer at Dolphinton, which no longer exists. I think it's exactly by the road. So that would have been the pattern only 50 years ago. But what's happened in the valley is that it's gone mostly back towards sheep grazing, and it's gone back towards rushes. So thrushes. The drainage hasn't been sorted, people haven't invested, and a lot of the land here is actually let on short-term lets. So you've got people who own the land, who are often commuters or high-flying people. They then rent the land to local farmers on a year's grazing let. And that means quite often they're getting the subsidy for it. So the guy who's renting the grazing hasn't got any investment at all to invest. There's no reason for them to do the drainage because they don't know if they're getting the ground next year or the year after or the year after that. So we've got a bit of the whole area it's in a bit of a long-term agricultural decline. So we didn't know any of this when we moved here. But the story further back is that in the 1750s, there were probably three of the richest people in Scotland moved out to this area because this is the toll road that you drove down. So it's the toll road to London. So it would have been one of the few roads that you could actually get a carriage down most of the time because they had maintained it because it was the toll road and the post went down here and everything. So there were three very rich people who moved out to this area and basically set about draining the bog and enclosing the fields and putting down lime and then eventually putting down guano. And they put a lot of time and effort into trying to improve this area and to raise productivity in this area. And the local history, and I say it goes straight up the hill. It's quite compact. So we're sitting in the middle of the farm. There's field that way, two fields that way, and then straight up the hill. And there's about nearly 25% of the farms in woodland now. There was some woodland here before. We planted some more when we came. And we also pushed back all the field boundaries on the farm to the original boundaries and created these shelter belts and hedges. So the original field boundaries, which you'll see when we walk up, were laid down in the 18th century. And in those days, when you were enclosing the fields, if you think before that, there just weren't fields in the way we think of them now. They were just like ground. And if you had a stony area, then you built stone dikes. So you took the stones out of the field and you made stone walls, and that was a handy way of getting rid of the stones, but also enclosed the fields. Our area, the stone here is whin, it doesn't really do that job. It's not sandstone. So, and there's not big lumps of it near the surface, it's just slabs. So here what they did was they make 2 ditches and then this mound in between the ditches, and they planted a hedge along the top of the mound, and that was the way they did the field boundaries, as they didn't have stones. So you can still see those as you walk around the farm. So but they were being grazed right up over the mound and through the ditches. So we basically put the fences there, cleaned out the ditches, and we've planted the mounds again. So it's a bit more like how it would have been. So quite a lot in woodland. There's going to be more in woodland soon, but I can tell you more about that when we go around as to our next bit of planning for that. And then the fields, the flatter fields nearer the valley bottom are plowable, and that's where we do our silage and our veg and just on the farm. It basically gets claggier and thinner as you go up the hill, although in the woodland up top there's odd outcrops of peat, which is probably this deep. We've never gone down any further than that. So there's little bits of peat where there's been woodland for years and years and years. And there's odd little bits which is very sandy. But in the fields, most of it is this sort of grey, relatively high clay content soil that sits on top of in the statistical account of 1799 for the parish, it describes the soil as being, it says it's claggy with an impenetrable bottom. Mm-hmm. Right? So it has this impenetrable bottom where you've got sort of shale pan, sits about anything from 18 inches to 9 inches down under the soil. Mm-hmm. And basically what that means is that the water lies, it'll dry out in the summer, in the winter it'll poach. And in the 1799 account it says, making the ground not even fit for feeding sheep and turnips. So their view of this ground was it's pretty poor. Now if we'd read the 1799 account before we bought the farm, that would have been a good idea. Because the land hasn't really changed that much since then. It's still not fit for feeding sheep and turnips. And that puts a constraint on everything we do here. So we obviously, we need the dung. So as part of our rotation, we did the cattle in the shed, we need some straw bedding, and we need them to make lots of dung for us. And then we can use most of it to go back on the silage fields, and what we could spare we can use for the veg. So our rotation, we need the dung. The ewes stay outside all winter until we bring them in for lambing, and we lamb inside. And the pigs stay outside till about the time the cattle stay outside. And then we bring them in. Again, we used to run the pigs in the shelter belts in the winter, which they loved, but they didn't put on any condition. So the fatteners just ate a lot of food to stay thin, and the sows had a great time basically eroding the banks of the ditches and putting a shed load of topsoil into the streams and having it float out to sea. So we just stopped doing that. So we're sort of always trying to balance the needs of soil with what's the best way of ensuring the welfare of the animals. And basically under organic standards, the key thing is if you have them inside, they've got to have plenty of room. They've got to have straw. You can't do slatted floors for pigs or cattle. You've got to create an environment where the animals are going to be well. By the way, is anybody else wanting more coffee? Did you get coffee? Did you want anything? No. Right. Do you want one? Yeah, right, we'll get them. So we do for Christmas, and that fits in reasonably well with the rest of the rotation because we put the turkeys in the cattle shed until the cattle are ready to come in. So can squidge them up a bit so the cattle, if we need to bring a few cattle in early, we can get a few cattle in early. And then we put the turkeys out every day to pasture and walk them back. And turkeys are unbelievably, they're very curious, but they're also very stupid. So they're always interested in what's going on. They just forget what went on yesterday. so when you take them out of the shed to the field, they go, where are we going, where are we going, where are we going? You open the gate and they go, oh, the field. And then they sort of hang out the field for the day, and then you sort of go and get them, and they say, where are we going? Okay, the shed. And they get to within sort of 10 yards of the shed, and you open the door, and they go, the shed, we remember. And they run in. It's like completely bizarre. With a dairy cow, you just open the gates, and they walk back in. Turkeys, you could do that, and they just look at you, and in fact, what they would do is they'd fall asleep where they are when it got dark, and just stand there waiting to be eaten by a fox. So we do the turkeys, and we got a few hens for eggs, and they're out in the paddock at the moment. What we do when we've got a spare tunnel is we bring them into the tunnel, so we drag the houses into the polytunnel. And what that means is that they can get out and scratch about in the dry. And particularly the last couple of years when we had a lot of snow, that's ideal for them because they don't like the snow, hence they will not walk in snow. So that's the animals. And all the livestock go to the butchery that you'll see, and then the butchery we also buy in other organic beef and lamb from other farms.
Just to complete the circle, how do you kill the livestock? Where do can you kill anything on farm or not?
We kill turkeys ourselves, and when we do table birds, which we haven't done for a couple of years, we can kill them on the farm. But we send the pigs and the sheep and the cattle away to shots, which is, it's about 30 miles from here, which is fine. I mean, we've not had any. We had one incident of a pig's leg being broken because they'd set the stunner too high. You have an electric stunner that you put on before you cut the throats, and that's they basically adjusted it for a sow and they haven't adjusted it back for a smaller pig. So that was the one. It was too big a shock. Got our leg broken. But that was about 6 years ago. We haven't had any problems since then.
Do you observe? Do you send someone up to the abattoir every time?
But the thing is, because you get the meat back,
the carcasses you get back are yours.
Because basically everything, the pigs are slat marked, the cattle are tagged, and the lambs are guaranteed.
We heard from some at the Crofting Association a while ago, and he said that there have been sort of rumours in the past of crofters sending the animals off and being convinced that the back wasn't theirs.
I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure it's possible. It used to be that lambs had no ID at all on them. So, it could happen if you was killing 5,000 lambs a day, you get one. There's also plenty of farmers who say, I sent my animals off, and the grader got back from the slaughterhouse wasn't, they're wrong. They weren't R3As, they were, R4As or whatever, So sometimes it's like, it's a bit wishful thinking, but I'm sure they still has to make mistakes, absolutely. We could quite often mistake with our pigs because, one, they don't do many pigs, and two, you could tell a commercial pig from an organic pig very, very easily.
Why?
Well, they just have different shaped carcasses. So, and they'll have, ours will have slightly more fat cover. We don't make ours fat, but because they're a more traditional breed, they will end up with more fat cover. Different sorts of muscling. But the most important thing is the herd number, right? But we can go in and we can trace when that bullock was born, when it was moved here, when it was moved off to slaughter, and anything else that happened to that bullock. And obviously we've got pack date and use by date. And then here you've got the stuff that needs to be put on, so we need to say keep refrigerated, because consumers in the UK are thick as pig shit, or thick as mince. EU stroke non-EU agriculture. What does that mean? And we have to have these labels because for some of our products we have things like pepper in, which is not a product of EU agriculture. right? So although this is a product of EU agriculture, and it's never been outside Scotland. The fact is, because we couldn't print, a label for everything. It's not what goes on the label, but actually printing the label. You have to print 10,000 of these. So we're not printing a different label for the ones that have pepper in and the ones that don't. And they're going to say, okay, so which pigs did these come from? Right. So we have to be able to go back in the butchery records and the farm records and tell them which pigs these came from. Okay. Now, you compare that to the US of A, where if you're very lucky, you might find out which slaughterhouse your beef burger was killed in, but that's it. Which state it was from, what happened to that animal, no bloody idea. Whereas this, you couldn't tell where that animal was born, where it was reared, how old it was on the day of slaughter. Right? So, and then obviously we have to put in all our ingredients here for the sausages, so...
There's absolutely no requirement, legal requirement for the farm to be inspected. So you can produce food for the public, without being inspected at all by anybody. If you want to get something like the minimum standard, which is red tractor, then you have to be inspected once a year. And so once a month is red tractor. But red tractor guarantees nothing beyond the legal minimum for animal welfare. Right, so you can have barn chickens, you can have battery chickens, you can have pigs on slatted floors, you can have farrowing crates, you can have all that stuff and still have red tractor. So red tractor doesn't tell you anything about the animal welfare stuff on the farm. It's just someone's done an inspection and probably pretty brief. It's not illegal to have pigs crammed in sheds where they don't see light of day, as long as the water works. So they're not. It's very minimal inspection. The rest of it's just hype really. So you can go from not having a farm inspected at all, you never have to have anybody in the farm. If you're not trying to sell anything with a label on that's got any quality mark, and then you work up from red tractor to things like Scottish beef quality assured. And again, even that, I'm not saying it's rubbish, but we used to get that done because if you wanted to sell animals, and
one year we went around and I'd got in my records there were 39 sheep, and we went up on top of it and she said I can only count 38. And I'm going, well, I'm sure the other one was here somewhere. No, if you haven't got 39 sheep, then there's something wrong with your records. And we eventually found the 39th sheep, and it was like, oh, for God's sake, it's just a bunch of sheep, on the hill, So they could have died, they could have wandered over to neighbours. I don't know where the 39th sheep is, but we went on till we found it. So yeah.
Free range.
Yeah.
So have you ever worked out what the nominal cost of being organic is per product? The cost, like the extra label?
No, we turn about £800,000 a year. So, on that scale, it's a burden, but it's not crippling. If you turned over £50,000 a year, spending £1,000 on inspection would be a huge issue. In terms of our customer base, we've done focus groups with looking at our core customers. We have this community supported agriculture type scheme here, so we have 250 people who have accounts with the farm.
Right.
So they're people who sort of made a commitment to buy stuff from the farm, and they put anything from 20 quid a month to 200 quid a month into our bank account every month. And then they basically draw down on that. And we have three groups of people. We have the people who buy more than they spend. They buy more from the shop than they've given us, and every so often we have to write very kindly and say, it's about 400 quid, could you start paying a bit more? And, oh yes, no problem at all. We have people who give us a lot of money and have to be persuaded to spend it. So we have to phone them up and say, we've got a fantastic new, John Bousquet wine in here. What about a case? In fact, what about a case of wine? Come to Valentine's dinner and we'll send you, a selection of our very nicest cheeses. And they go, okay, then whatever, because we owe them 500 quid, right? And then you have people who get it exactly right every month. I just take my hat off to them, They're within 10 pence when we reckon up every 2 months of what they've put in is what they spend.
I guess they're all doing it for different reasons.
They're all doing it for different reasons. So you have people who really, really want to support the farm. And you have people who have made these very conscious decisions to say, I'm going to buy organic meat, I'm going to buy organic milk, I'm going to buy organic eggs, I'm going to buy organic veg, but the rest I'm going to buy from Tesco's. You know, and when we had these focus groups, we picked some of the people who have the bigger accounts with us who are buying like a big chunk of their shopping organically. And the university people came in and did this, and they said, well, so what's the motivation here? And these were people who were saying, I'd buy organic, I would seek out organic to buy organic produce because it's important to me. So when this farm came along, I thought, great, I can buy my stuff there. But if they hadn't been here, I'd have gone to other places to seek it out. And so they were sort of deep greens, and then there were light greens who said, well, I like their meats, or, you know, I really like this product, or these products which I buy from there. But quite a lot of people said, but I like to spread my business around because there's a local butcher that needs some help, and there's a local, you know, I get my eggs from this other farmer who's nearer me, and blah, blah, blah. So you had some very sophisticated buying behavior, people saying, no, runs back.
Yeah, I'll let you finish. Sorry.
We sort of, we haven't paid much attention this last year to the sport. So one of our sort of aims this year is to increase that. There's a natural, there's a tribal number which a lot of the CSAs seem to get to around 200, 250, where they hit a sort of wall in terms of building that. So we're not unique in sort of being around there, but we've had, what has been really interesting is very little attrition during the recession. You know, so we've had people who said, look, we've both lost our jobs, we just can't keep doing this, we'd love to do it. If one of us gets a job back, you know, we'll come back, but you know, I'll probably be looking at fortnightly deliveries. Is that all right? You know? And you go, yeah, that's absolutely great. So you've got this, we're trying to tap into this, if you like, motivation from people who want to see change in the way we do food. You know, and so we're offering them, you know, very much something that's not simply a customer relationship. You know, we're asking people to join something that's bigger than, it's bigger than us and as well as bigger than them.
I was going to ask, do you have a lot of waste, and how do you try and prevent waste within your business? Like, when you, a lot of your produce is probably seasonal, and is there any leftover? Does your scheme work with your money scheme? Does that help you figure out?
It doesn't particularly do that. I mean, we still, you know, there are sort of two main areas where you can get waste. One is field waste. So, you know, there's always time during the year when you've got too many lettuces. It doesn't matter how careful you are, you know, you're going to have too many lettuces. Luckily on our scale, it might be that we have to give 200 lettuces to the pigs, but we don't have to give 20,000 lettuces to pigs or plough them into the ground. You know, so yes, inevitably things like lettuces and cabbages, you know, you're either not going to have enough or you're going to have too many. You know, you're never going to get that right. So yeah, there's a little bit of waste there that's unavoidable. And then the other waste, obviously, is primarily plate waste from the restaurant. In terms of vegetables, and that's taken a while to get to that point because, you know, when we first had chefs here, and we'd never run a restaurant before, they were going, well, we just need to order some stuff. And we'd go, yeah, it's in there. That's your depot. And they'd go, but here's our menu for the day. And we'd say, no. Your menu for the day is when you've been in there, then you can tell us what the menu for the day is. And similarly working with a butcher, it's like saying, you can't put pork chops on the menu if there isn't any pork. You know, what you put on the menu is what we've got plenty of. So that really helps with the waste. You know, if it's going off, we eat it. If it's past that, it goes to staff. If it's past going to staff, it goes to pigs. And there's not much that's past going to pigs. We can't put stuff that's been in the kitchen to the pigs. So we can only put stuff that's been in the veg porch but hasn't been near a kitchen to the pigs. So because once it's been in the kitchen, there's a risk of meat contamination. And
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, it's pretty unlikely to happen.
Let's put an AD plant or pigs, and it's also that in most intensive, most commercial pig systems, what they don't really want is a variable quality feed. Because in commercial pig systems, the amount of protein the pigs get and the weight of the food they get is measured to within like 1%. So you don't really want, spaghetti today and broccoli tomorrow, and fish and chips the next day. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not consistent. So I think the swill feeding probably non-plastic is pigs. And we'd love it. It'd be great for our system because we're within 10 or 20%. But for the precision boys, it's.
Do you have a wholesale business?
Sorry?
Do you have a wholesale business?
Yeah, small. We sell to my office in Edinburgh, so they've got 7 shops, and we sell pillars of Hercules, and a couple of places out in East Lothian, and maybe got a dozen wholesale customers.
Restaurants?
We do some restaurants. Our experience with restaurants has been that, so we sell it to Charlie, Italy, but we don't push it, and it's partly because it's not all restaurants, everyone's not like the lava, but a lot of restaurants are still in that thing about saying, I want 40 lamb cutlets, or I want, 100 ribeye steaks, and that's fine for them, but actually we can't charge them enough for ribeye steaks to make it worth our while. Killing a beast, 4 beasts to make them ribeye steaks, so if they want us to cut it down into primals, we can do that, but they shouldn't be asking us to produce, this.
Well, do you know, I suppose one thing we touched on.
Paisley who they started 10 of them ordering from us, and they keep building up the numbers. So we have a courier comes and picks up. I don't know how many orders we've got now, a week for them, which isn't great because they would be getting it from the west of Scotland, but there isn't anyone doing what we're doing. You ready to have a think?
No, who was it? Yes, you were asking me about what's in haggis. And I thought this was a good question. What is haggis and how did it all start? And what I started talking to this group about is haggis is really old, really ancient. And when you think about how our ancestors used to feed themselves, it certainly wasn't nipping down to Tesco. They had to work very collaboratively in tribes and teams to get protein in particular. And once you'd killed an animal after expending all these calories, you weren't going to waste any of it. So I like to think of haggis as being the kind of kill feast, because they soon learned that the offal bits went off quicker. So, and the animal will be a lot lighter to hold bag if you've taken the entrails out as well. So practical. Haggis, in inverted commas, once upon a time could have been made of, if you lived in the Middle East, camel. If you lived on the American plains, buffalo. Here in Scotland, well, we've got quite a lot of deer, and goodness knows what animals were around in cavemen times that aren't here now. Mammoth? Haggis, anybody?
Ooh, gosh.
Who knows? Dinosaur haggis. That would have been very ambitious. In terms of what it is, I don't think there's really a strict code about this. And that's also, I think, one of the reasons why you see so much recipe variation. If you pick up 10 different brands of haggis, you go to an independent butcher or you buy Hall's haggis, they're not the same. There are a lot of variations. So our branded recipe, and I have to say that now because we make haggis for Marks and Spencer's, has always been made with lamb. One of the things we've been experimenting with in our 60th year is how else can we define it? So if haggis is a global food, why is it associated with Scotland? And for that, we turn to Robert Burns, really, this man, to whom I owe my living, really. And that's because one night in Edinburgh, as he was prone to do, he sat and wrote a little ditty about haggis. I think really as a tongue-in-cheek kind of thing. I don't think he ever thought it would be said around the world as much as it is now. and it's often delivered with far too much seriousness, by the way. I don't know how many of you have been to a Burns night and you sort of think, oh, lighten up. It's meant to be a funny poem, really. I guess it's interesting to think about why haggis for Burns other than the poem, but I think it's also because it sums up a lot about him as a person, in that he wasn't pretentious and it was a humble food. And haggis, I think, has that ability to both be comfortable sitting on a bar stool, if you like, as well as Tom Kitchen fine dining. It doesn't really have any class barriers, I don't think, and I like that about it. You can posh it up, or you can enjoy it with a pint. It's happy either way. But the 25th is his birthday, and I think the combination of the poem, the combination of haggis being this humble food, and the fact that Burns was a Mason, all contributed to the ritual that we now understand to be Burns Night. The Masonic connection, I think, is particularly important. The great thing about, if you're in the Masonic Brotherhood, is you're all equal. It doesn't matter what class you might be out with the Brotherhood. You know, you all club together and help each other, and that's how Burns got his work published, because they got behind him and helped come up with the money for the subscription of his now very famous Kilmarnock edition. But they also like a lot of ritual, and that's why I think the Masonic link is why Burns Night has evolved into not just sitting down and going, oh, he was a great man, Burns, you know, which is how it started. You know, you've lost a good friend and you want to remember him or her every year. But I think this whole piping in of a dish, I mean, it's really weird when you think about it. We don't do it for anything else. You know, there's a piper, there's an address, there's a stabbing. It's like a murder scene, really. And I think that's both bizarre and wonderful. It's bizarre and a bit alienating, especially if you're not Scottish. It's wonderful because once a year this food product gets some attention, but it doesn't always get the attention I want. And that's my big mission, because a lot of people, particularly out with Scotland, think that in order to eat it, they need to have been introduced to it by a Scottish person. And often when you speak to the English, they'll say that. Oh yes, the reason I have haggis is because a Scottish person once gave it to me, or once invited me to a Burns night. It's like a rite of passage they can't do on their own. And that to me is a massive barrier to it evolving from a thing, we do call it the haggis for some reason, into a food. And where I'd like haggis to evolve to is that we would talk about it like we do charcuterie. I mean, it is really a part of Scottish charcuterie. But because it's called the haggis, and the Scots themselves are great at denigrating their own culture, you know, I'm sure you don't need to go far down the Royal Mile to find pretty hideous postcards of little animals with snouts and all sorts of stuff. You know, if you come to Scotland as a visitor, you could be understandably confused and quite panicked about eating this food. I mean, it's almost a dare. I dare you.
There's a very well, we watched a very well.
Would you eat haggis on the basis of this?
They live in the forest.
Oh really? And this is Visit Scotland?
Visit Scotland.
Donald, I'm so depressed. I need to know who's responsible for this.
They were very cute. But, yeah.
Right, okay.
Compensation. Yeah.
Well, you see, I'll never be out of a job, will I, in terms of my mission. But so I have this sort of paradoxical view about Burns Night. I love it, but it has issues. And that's not to say I don't enjoy one, and a really good immortal memory is fantastic. So to us, I guess, and how did we come about? Well, there's a great archive here. This is what happens when you have a royal visit and they say you better do a presentation, and I didn't know how to use PowerPoint, so I said, hey, here's our archive. So you can have a look at these pictures, but our history is really that we are butchers to trade, and my grandfather ran a fantastic emporium that's now, I don't know what it is, it was Bar 38, I don't know what it's become since, towards Charlotte Square on the left-hand side, some kind of bar now, but that used to be this amazing emporium that actually was so ahead of its time. They separated cooked and raw food. You know, no one was talking about doing that. And as for the supply chain, well, the live animals were herded up Rose Street, and it had its own abattoir. You know, don't think we get away with the live animals going up Rose Street anymore. But so that was the pedigree of my grandfather, and he learnt to make haggis there. And controversially, I guess, I think he learnt how to make haggis from a German who was the head sausage maker. So that's another interesting twist in the tale. So then that business shut. His daughter continued it with my grandfather as manager, and then she got an offer on the property she couldn't refuse. So it was one of those moments in his life where he was about my age, he was in his 40s, he had 3 children, he wasn't looking to start a business, but circumstances, redundancy had forced him to consider his options. And Mr. Orr's daughter said, "Charlie, I really don't think you should go and work for someone else, I think you should set up on your own." Well, in 1952-53, there was still rationing in place. He didn't have very much money, and she said, "I have so much confidence in you. Here's £5,000, a loan, interest-free." So he went for it, and that there is the first shop in Brunsfield, which is part of the big nowadays Costa Coffee on Beaufort. But the rationing, you see, adversity is a great thing. There's always 2 sides to it. The rationing was a godsend because rationing meant loyalty. So all his ladies in George Street transferred their ration cards to his shop because they wanted the relationship. They wanted the wink wink, can I have a few extra things under the counter, I imagine, and all of that. So that actually turned out to be a great thing. And then my father joined in the late 50s, and they bought gradually over the period of 10 years all the businesses round the corner. And when my grandfather died in 75, life was good. Supermarkets weren't really an issue, but they soon became that. And that's really what forced us as a business to really have a hard look at our long-term future. Because the minute Safeway opened in Morningside, which is now Waitrose, our sales just did this, basically. People shop differently. My mum, before she became a working mum, would go to the greengrocer, to the butcher, to the baker. It would be, 6 different trips of a day. And when she got a job, she didn't have time to do that, much as it hacked off my father. She was shopping in supermarkets too. So we had basically the choice of if you can't beat them, join them, or carry on relentless. And thanks to my mother, who always had amazing vision, she said, we should be supplying these people. They are the future. And why did we manage to do that? Well, over the period of years, we built this reputation for making rather a good haggis. And my father was a natural marketeer, really, and if a group of people like you had turned up, he would have given up his day for you because he just loved enthusing about the product. So then we got our product into Selfridges in London, and that really opened up major opportunities in London, and we became probably more well known in London than we did in Glasgow. So that was a great that was a definite step change after that, because then Selfridges and Harrods followed after that. You've got a window, in the biggest city in the country. So things started to look up at that point. And then we had to decide, can we really keep making haggis out of a shop? When the oatmeal delivery would arrive, half the workforce had to stop and handball the oatmeal off. It would be an hour, and then you get a parking ticket as well. And then Greenways came along. So we thought, right, enough is enough. So we sold the premises there, and we moved here in 1996. And I believe we can claim to be the first production kitchen, if you like, dedicated to haggis and haggis alone. No one's ever told me I'm wrong there, but so we've been here ever since, and you're now sitting in the extension, and we've outgrown this site because we have a dispatch site down the road. We can't fit everything in here now. And then my brother and I joined in the early 90s. So it's 3rd generation, and we're 60 kind of now. It's a year-long celebration, you see. Started in the autumn and will go on until this autumn. And one of the ways we've decided to celebrate is by having a storyteller in residence. A lot of companies put logos on their product, And I think, well, that's nice. But you don't get to 60 without a lot of people helping you. And the team here are great, and some of them have worked with us back to those days. We've got 2 members of staff. That's one of them there in the night, which was rather nice. Well, he left a few times in a rage, but he always came back.
I'll count you all out.
Pardon me?
I have to count them all out when we leave.
So their stories are really special, in particular, because David in particular just remembers my granddad. Keith, obviously, both of them remember my father. And so we brought in Stuart Delves back in May last year. And a lot of the staff thought this was one of my weirdest ideas yet. You know, Jack a bloody Nori, whatever next? You know, I said, it's not quite like that. So we decided that to help the staff have something to lean on, if you like, psychologically. He brought a knife because he said, I'm a master trained butcher and I'm a man of scars, because when you learn to use a knife, you make mistakes, you know, and that's what's defined my career. So this took us on a remarkable journey, and it involved my sisters, who don't work in the business but grew up in it. My uncle, my father's brother, was interviewed, and just 2 weeks ago we had to kind of sew it all into a sort of an entity, and we did this, and we had a big party for the staff for the 60th, and Stuart somehow took hours and hours of notes and weaved it into a wonderful story that started with a bit of a rant, actually, from the staff about how busy January had been. So they thought that was hilarious, and it assumed I'd edit all their kind of moans out of it. But I said, no, your moaning is part of your sweat and part of how you get a day's work done sometimes. We all moan. So we got the moaning out of the way, and then, which they thought was very funny. And then he started to weave the fact that we've got a lot of folks who work here come from a long way away. You know, a lot of Polish people work here now. Haggis is not just global in its origin, it's global in its making now. And I wanted some of the staff who were indigenous to understand some of the sacrifices that people from Poland and Spain and Sierra Leone have made to come here. Some of their stories are horrendous, actually, about what they've had to leave behind. And so it was another way of the staff connecting with each other, that they didn't actually know that about Shimak or Terry, or so there was bonds made that night, definitely. And then he said, well, and once upon a time, 4 generations ago, the McSweens left a croft up in the Highlands because it wasn't sustainable anymore. We had a river running through our croft, and we had to come to the lowlands. So again, it was making that connection between now and then. But sorry. His mother is a folk musician, Margaret Bennett, so that was in his pedigree. And then he kind of shook it all up and took it to a nightclub. And the result was phenomenal, actually. He made folk popular, but not by in any way diluting its quality. And I think that is a really clever thing to do. So any product innovations that my brother and I do, we have to be proud of. You know, they have to be true to our values of quality and standard and taste, and not be gimmicky either. That's hard.
Can you can it?
Pardon?
Can you can it?
You can. You can can a haggis.
They sell canned haggis at Edinburgh Airport.
Yeah.
What's in the vegetarian haggis?
Sorry. Yes, I forgot you had that. Veggie haggis. No meat. You'll be pleased to know. Innovation. This is what happens when somebody lays down a gauntlet to my father, a kind of dare, if you like. I don't know, have many of you been to the Poetry Library in the Royal Mile? It's a lovely building, but that opened in 1984, and the founder wanted a kind of a sponsor for the opening of it. So she contacted my father and said, would you provide haggis? We're opening in January. And I thought, well, that's a nice mix, you know, Burns Night, poetry, you're on, of course. Her throwaway remark, however, was, by the way, there'll be vegetarians coming. I expect you to think of something. Well, jumping off a cliff might have been my father's response to that, because he never understood vegetarians, and as far as he was concerned, why would you give up the slab of meat in the middle? You know, the veggies is to go on the side. Anyway, he was persuaded, and with a bit of education about what vegetarians eat, he set to work on a recipe. Now, he didn't really think about the casing, so he stuffed it. In fact, that's a photograph of not the original haggis. That's when he developed into a recipe that was sold commercially. He was a bit short of time, so he stuffed it into an animal's stomach, a sheep's stomach, because he thought, well, she didn't go into that level of detail. So the veggie haggis ended up getting more press coverage than the opening of the library. And then my dad had this really bizarre situation of getting sort of fan mail, I think it's the best word to describe it, from vegetarians saying, we've heard about this vegetarian haggis. Where can I guess it? And Dad said, no, it was a one-off, But when the 16th letter arrived, he began to think, there's maybe an opportunity here. And I think it appealed to his rather perverse sense of humour, because we were still in the butcher's shop then, that could he really get vegetarians to come into a butcher's shop? Yes. So then, as we were discussing, he had the really difficult job of taking literally a one-off haggis of that size to a £1,000 batch, which is our batch weight. That's when the real work began, and it took him months and months and months to get the consistency right. And the hardest thing is that you're moving from the animal fat that I described to all of you that retains some kind of substance to vegetable margarine that melts to nothing, and he just couldn't get the recipe consistency to work. So when I was still at school, and I remember he'd bring home these dishes, I go, oh God, Dad's been doing product development, and there was 10 of them, and we had to score them, and we all loved number 8. But Dad, you've cracked it, it's so tasty. And he said, well, there's a bit of a problem with number 8. I said, what? He said, I put beef fat in that one. I said, why? So I thought it would taste really good. And I'm like, yeah, well, it does, but it's not vegetarian. So we had to sort of discount that one. But he got there. A lot of hard work. And then we got approved by the Veggie Society and so on. And from a bit of a dare, a bit of a joke, it's now about 1 in 3, 1 in 4, it varies a little bit, of every haggis we sell is vegetarian. And it's not all being eaten by veggies either. You know, a lot of men eat veggie haggis. They don't always like to admit it, but they do. And forgotten his name, Donald. You'll know this guy. He's a real bon viveur of whiskey.
Charlie McLean. Charlie McLean.
Yes, I think it was him. I did a whiskey magazine tasting, and the veggie haggis was part of it, and it was being matched with whiskies, and I was just almost cringing, waiting for his response to the veggie haggis.
Joey, you might need to stop talking for this.
Yes. And you know, he ended up scoring it really highly and saying, do you know, that was the real surprise for me of the day, was the veggie haggis and how much I loved it.
Do you want to try a veggie haggis?
Of course.
And which whiskey haggis? Because too often butchers were using it as a dustbin. And therefore you might like it one week, come back the next week, oh, it tastes a bit different, I don't know if I like that haggis now. And he said it's got to be predictable, and that means being consistent about what you put in it. So yes, and I guess, I can't remember when I first came up with that, quite a while ago now. And the more you listen to consumers, the more you think, actually, is that appropriate now? So you can never